Firstly, the investigation into the text. If you've not read this book, I don't know what you're doing. It is a classic. I strongly recommend everybody does. But so it's essentially a dystopian novel. It's about a society that strongly discourages any reading or intellectual expansion of any kind. In fact, the government actually goes in as far as to reprimand anybody in possession of books or music or literature of any kind, or even art. So it's a very dystopian society. The firefighters, their main job, their actual department, their purpose of their department is to burn books. That is what they do. And they've managed to kind of make the society succumb to these docile influences, and everybody kind of looks up to these firefighters as if they're heroes, if they're doing a positive thing. And the whole notion, there's a few adaptations of this. I've seen a movie of this. It's a little bit different than the book. But the main reason is that if you do have access to knowledge, access to new perspectives, your current perspectives will be challenged. Okay, your current perspectives will be, you'll be pushed out of your comfort zone, and it could be potentially dangerous or hazardous. And a weak mind, I would say, would look at that and try to run from it and try to not grow and only want to be in a sense of reassuring information and within the confines of their comfort zone. So with all of that said, the firefighters burn books. That is your job. And this story follows a main character by the name of Guy Montag. And he goes about burning books. And eventually he comes into contact with a young teenage girl who has she's rather peculiar character. He notes she's rather eccentric in her attributes, and he's really curious about her. So he has some discussions with her. And long story short, he begins to question why he's doing what he's doing for the first time in his life. And you realize that this act of thinking, this act of rumination, of reflection, of speculation is so discouraged. They went as far in this book as the architects to design houses without porches and without furniture, because they didn't want you to sit around and discuss things and talk and converse. So the only thing they wanted you to do, the only really important pastime these individuals had, was to get up and moving. It was described that they would drive fast on the freeways and things like that. And that's kind of symbolic to just live fast and never reflect and never learn and never ponder and never sit in stillness and reflect on your life so you can gain any insight, because obviously this was discouraged by the government. So throughout the story, we follow Guy Montag's, journey of curiosity. And he begins to question, again, like I said, why he's doing what he's doing for the first time. He doesn't realize that he's burning books or what's in them. He's just doing what he's told, right? So the story kind of follows him for a while, and then eventually he begins to collect books, collect magazines, articles of literature and art and things like this. His wife actually exposes him he has what he thinks are private conversations with his wife about just like his thoughts. He begins to entertain a little bit of a conspiracy toward the fire department itself, he was right for doing so. He begins to question what he's doing, to question what's in books, question why he's doing everything. And again, his wife is really, for lack of a better term, she's a coward. She's scared of this conversation. She doesn't want to dabble in this realm at all. So she exposes him. The fire department ends up finding that he has a bunch of information and books at his house. He has to burn his house. He flees. Long story short, he flees with this other little group of intellectuals to assumingly start a new society. The book ends with him I believe it's in the woods or something like this, with his little band of intellectuals, and they realize the importance of knowledge, and they want to assumingly start a new society after this. It's kind of ambiguous in the ending. It's open-ended. So with that said, the implication that I want to talk about here, that I think the main point in this entire book is the importance of curiosity and questioning and the acquisition of knowledge. So the main point that I want to talk about is some experiences or some information or some knowledge or some wisdom, depending on its value or its utility, is worth sacrificing for. So obviously we have this example of the main character. What did he sacrifice? He sacrificed his reputation. He sacrificed his reputation and his freedom in doing this, in his pursuit of knowledge. And he realizes, I think, the biggest catalyst moment in this entire book. It's about 50 pages in, and the main character is describing where he's on a typical job. He's doing what he has to do, And he comes across this large house, and it's kind of abandoned. Maybe it's off the grid or something like this. And it has thousands and thousands of books, more than he's ever seen, more than his captain has ever seen. And then in the movie, I don't know if it's mentioned in the book. I watched the movie more recently, but the captain says, take a good look at this because you might not never see this many books again. So there's a lady in the house of books, and assumingly this is her library, and they douse all the books with kerosene. They do what they're going to do, and they're going to burn the house down. They have their fire ready, and they're trying to evacuate the woman out of the house with her. Now this woman decides to stay in the house, and the guy Montag he's questioning this. He doesn't understand this. He doesn't understand why she would do what she would do. So he leaves the house, and he notes when he's looking back, there's a scene he describes, the woman standing as a silhouette in the doorway, engulfed in flames in her burning house full of books. So I'm going to read a few lines from the book to substantiate this point. And he's talking to his wife about this after he goes home that night, and he says, there must be something in books, things we can't imagine, to make a woman stay in a burning house. There must be something there. And then again, this gets him to pursue his seed of curiosity. And then his thoughts follow the narrative of, it's not just that woman that died. Last night, I thought about all that kerosene I've used in the past decade. And I thought about books. And for the first time, I realized that a man was behind each one of those books. A man had to think them up. A man had to take a very long time to put them down on paper. And I'd never even thought about that before. It took some men a lifetime to maybe put some of their thoughts down, looking around at the world and life, and then I come along in 2 minutes, and boom, it's all over. So he realizes the disparity, the potential detrimental effects on what he's having on people, on civilization, on erasing and jettisoning an entire human life within the confines of a book. So it's a lot deeper than burning paper. He's burning ideas, which ideas are immortal. And he realizes this, and then again, this is the catalyst moment in his life. So I believe this is, he sacrificed his freedom and his reputation for his pursuit of knowledge, pursuit of curiosity. And I want to explain this with a second point. When I was reading Fahrenheit 451, about a week prior to reading this book, I was reading the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass actually has a eerily similar moment of realization and catalyzation in his life. And this is an autobiography. It's in chapter 6. And Frederick Douglass was age, I think he was only 7 or 8. And his master's wife, Mrs. Auld, was teaching him how to read books. And then he noticed that his master did not like this. He reprimanded this. And he said, Mr. Auld found out what was going on and at once forbade Mrs. Auld to instruct me further, telling her, among other things, that it was unlawful as well as unsafe to teach a slave to read. And even though Frederick was only 8 years old, okay, he has a very elementary understanding of the world and how things work, he still realized the importance of this. This was a catalyst moment in his life. And he says, from that moment, I understood the pathway from slavery to freedom. And then he has other insights that it says it's in the best interest of their masters to keep their slaves ignorant. So again, that was the catalyst in his life. And it goes on to describe after he was 8, 9, 10, teenage years, he would actually sacrifice his security, arguably his life, for this acquisition of knowledge. Now, what he did, since Mrs. Auld was forbidden to teach him how to read anymore, he would trade his meals that his master gave him to find educated white children for exchange of lessons and discussions on books and topics and things like this. So that was something that he understood in his life. And this is obviously it's not a fictional story, but I think it's the same narrative, the same situation that's happening here, the same principle, that both characters, both individuals recognize the importance of curiosity. They realize that once they begin this endless pursuit of intellectual expansion, they illuminate their chains. They illuminate their limitations. They illuminate the way that they believed the world was, and they realized that they were living however many decades of their life with these false set of beliefs that were deconstructive, that were unsupportive, that were ill-informed, that were misinformed, that weren't really applicable toward whatever definite end they had in mind. And they were severely limiting and severely detrimental because they both lived in a state of ignorance until they began to witness the importance of the acquisition of knowledge and curiosity. So the next point that I want to talk about is essentially the application here. Okay, so in short, it's obviously seek knowledge, but it's more so I want to talk about why. And there's a few reasons. One, I believe that a lot of us go through, well, first of all of us are born completely ignorant, pretty much an empty vessel, minus like genetic and other variable factors. All of us are born an empty vessel in terms of our consciousness, in terms of our competence, in terms of our abilities, in terms of our paradigms, our beliefs, right? We're not born with beliefs. They are imbued on us through our conditioning and through our input, and they're reinforced through the input that we choose or unconsciously choose throughout our lifetimes. So we pass through a stage akin to exactly what these individuals passed through a stage of. They were in what I would call unconscious incompetence, right? In other words, they didn't know what they didn't know. They were living a life that was just completely, in Fahrenheit 451's case, completely fabricated, completely not of his desiring, not of his liking. The first, quarter of the book before Guy Montag has this realization of curiosity, it's a rather bleak and dystopian sense, and he's rather troubled. He has some sense of just not really fitting in with his environment. And this is highlighted in his conversation with other members of his society. This is highlighted and illuminated with his discussions and dynamic with his wife, and his society in general. He doesn't seem to fit in, and he's at a state of really being discordant with his environment, because again, he was living in a state of unconscious incompetence. And then finally, at the end of this journey, at the end of our intellectual expansion, we begin to highlight what we don't know. We begin to highlight the destructive beliefs that we have been manifesting and living through and operating under. And finally, I would say, after we overcome all of these ill-informed beliefs, we would arrive at a state of conscious competence. So that is knowing what we do not know, or conscious incompetence, and then finally conscious competence. Those are kind of both sides of the same coin, assuming you have self-awareness and assuming that we would look at what we are incompetent at and have the humility to develop ourselves and look at the information that we would need. That's contingent upon our desires, right? So, and I think this is also established in the famous quote by Socrates, where he was arguably one of the wisest men ever. All of us still hear about him thousands of years later. And one of his most famous quotes is, all I know is that I know nothing, right? It's like, what do you mean, Socrates? Everybody's looking at him as the wisest individual, but he's over here saying, I don't know anything. I'm completely ignorant. Because once you grasp something, once you begin to become competent, you pass a threshold, you pass a barrier, and you look at all of the things that you don't know. And then obviously there's all of the things that you don't know that you don't know. So I think this is important to imbue an attitude of humility. And I think it's interesting to notice that it's always the people that are well, not always, but usually the people that are the least informed that are the most confident in what they know, right? They say, I know this, I know that, I know a lot. And it's like, I think that's a very dangerous attitude to have. So yeah, I think that was exactly exemplified in the example of Socrates in his life. So I'm gonna move on for a second to an idea from Henry David Thoreau's Observations on Reading. And this is from a book called Walden. It's kind of unrelated, but the part that I'm going to read is kind of applicable to this pursuit of knowledge in this imperative state of curiosity. So he says, any man will go considerably out of his way to pick up a silver dollar, but here are golden words, which every succeeding age has assured us of. And yet we learn to read only as far as easy reading, the primers and class books. And when we leave school, the little reading and storybooks, which are for boys and beginners, and our reading, our conversation and our thinking are all on a very low level. We are underbred and low-lived and illiterate. And in this respect, I confess I do not make any broad distinction between the illiterateness of my townsman, who cannot read at all, and the illiterateness of him who has learned to read only for what is for children and feeble intellects. So in other words, he's saying that a lot of people get to this stage of unconscious incompetence, and then they don't develop on their skill. A lot of us have this baseline fundamental of knowledge of information, meaning we have meekly accepted and justified and fortified all of the beliefs we have been instilled by since childhood, and we never question those things. And Walden is making, or Thoreau is making the observation that those people are just as bad as people, or not want to say just as bad, just as illiterate or just as ill-informed as somebody who cannot read at all. And you put that in simpler words, if you don't read, you have no benefit over somebody who cannot read. Or not, I don't want to say benefit over somebody. You can say you'll get as far in life. If you don't read, you will get as far in life if you couldn't read, right? So that's an important point to note. And like Thoreau was saying, the townsmen who do not question, who do not develop their faculties, who do not seek the acquisition of knowledge, are just as detrimental, are living a life just as bleak, just as bland as Guy Montag before his catalyzation period. So to summarize, I want to talk about one more point that will highlight, I believe, the importance of the acquisition of knowledge. And this is because if we aim to change anything in our life, I believe it will start with information. Now, we know that it's not simply information, because all of us, I can prove this point, all of us intellectually understand how to do better, right? All of us understand that if we exercise 5 times a week for an hour, if we eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, if we drink a gallon of water a day, etc., if we read more, if we can do more in our job, we know how to do these things. We know how to improve our relationships in our lives, but that doesn't necessarily equate to results. So there is some gap, there is some chasm, there is some threshold between information and circumstances that we would desire to cross. But I don't think that will invalidate the importance of the information and the data in the first place. So there's a few steps to simplify it. I would have arguably 5 or 6, but I'll simplify it. I think it would go something like information, thoughts, beliefs, paradigm, self-image, action, habits, finally results. So that is 8, but we can kind of simplify into, I'll say, information, thoughts, actions, results. Make it 4, make it really easy. So firstly, the information. It's important to realize that we seek out information and associations and environments that reinforce our conditioning. In other words, that tell us we are right, that fortify our already established beliefs. So you realize this when you look at your social circles. A lot of the times, and this is a famous quote, you are the average of the 5 people you spend most time around. A lot of the times we spend time around people who have similar results in our lives. They are similar, let's say, physique or body. They're similar in their income, similar in the career. They kind of range pretty broadly within the confines of where we would deem our fulfillment or satisfaction in our career, etc. So we kind of live in these little chunks, right? In these little subgroups of society, which again, fortify our beliefs. We don't want people to challenge our thinking, because just like in the story with his wife, that would be weak-minded, and that kind of would lead to panic, because it's challenging everything you would rest your identity on. So again, we seek information in environments that fortify our conditioning. So I think that's an important note. And if we desire different results, we have to seek different input and associations and environment. And this goes back to the discussion last time with Aesop's Fables, the quack frog, right? You have to seek people who want the results who have the results that you would want, and you would learn to emulate them, or you would acquire some information or some knowledge or some insight or wisdom from them, and then you would begin to apply that in your life. But again, so we have this gap between information and knowledge. So let's say we go on a book haul, we get a bunch of beneficial books, we get a bunch of information, we start watching all these documentaries and TED Talks and YouTube series and everything like that. We get all this information, we take notes, we acquire all this data. Cool. Is that going to turn into results? Not necessarily. I think there's a few factors in the translation into results. I would firstly look at repetition of the information. For our beliefs are established through repetition. It's a very simple idea to go by, but I don't want you to overlook that. Beliefs are established by repetition. So if you tell yourself enough things, just like all of our beliefs were founded from childhood or from acquisition of information, but it was repeated enough times, then it becomes to form a belief. And we act on our beliefs. We don't act on our conscious knowledge. We act on our unconscious knowledge. You can call this the self-image. There's an entire field of psychology called psycho-cybernetics. There's a book written by Maxwell Maltz if you're interested in this line of information to results. Again, Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz explains this pretty well. So we act on our beliefs. So I would say that. And from information, we would have to repeat this information enough until it became a belief. And this belief would become imbued into our self-image. So an example of a self-image is making a subjective judgment on an objective event. Let me give you an example. Let's say two of us take a test in school, okay? So we are taking a math test. Let's say we both get the same score. We both get a 62 on the test. So that would objectively mean failure, okay? I could say, okay, I failed the test. That's it. It ends there. That's all I said. I failed the test. I didn't study enough, whatever I had to do. Whereas somebody else can say, oh, I failed the test because I'm a failure, because I'm bad at math, because I'm a terrible studier, because I'm not somebody who can focus, because I'm not an intellectual type of person. I'm more of a creative, artsy person, whatever whatever subjective judgment they want to justify their failure with. That's an example of their self-image actualizing into their results, okay? You don't always have to subjectively judge outward events by attaching an identity to them. But a lot of people do this unconsciously. They say, I'm not this type of person, or that's just the way I am. That's kind of similar to that. It's your self-image expressing itself in your behavior. And I'm kind of going on a rant, but this is a very, very prolific topic. So information repeated becomes beliefs. Beliefs repeated becomes self-image. We act on our self-image. We act on what we believe we can do. In other words, you will never outperform your self-image. You will never do something that you cannot mentally see yourself doing. Okay, so that's important as well. And then from there, from the self-image, we act. And of course, actions, it's not always one action that dictates a result, determines a result. It's always the consistency of action. And this is a perfect segue to what we're going to talk about next week, consistency over intensity. So I'll kind of pick up where I left off on that idea. And then finally, yeah, like I said, consistency of action. As Aristotle says, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit. So thank you.
Excellent, John. Okay, so we have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to start by asking you a question.
Okay.
You know, we have the situation in kind of artificial situation in Fahrenheit 451, where the society is clamping down on books. Okay, but we live in a society where books are plentiful, and we are literally drowning in an ocean of information and knowledge. Yet, so few of us actually energetically pursue it. Why is that?
Why is that? I mean, firstly, familiarity breeds contempt. If it's not rare, it's not going to be inherently valuable in our eyes. So I think that's one aspect of it. Secondly, I think it could be partially out of frustration because people might not understand this chain from information to results. People might just think, okay, I need to get my hands on better information and then change will happen in my life. No, there's a bunch of steps that are a lot more important in between. And some people could fall over that. I know I have in my life before I really figured out, I don't want to say I figured it out, but like I'm still learning everything. But there was definitely a time in my life where I thought it was only the acquisition of knowledge that would dictate results. Again, we don't act on our conscious beliefs, we act on our subconscious. We don't act on our conscious knowledge, we act on our subconscious beliefs. So yeah, I would say familiarity breeds contempt. I would say it's also maybe out of frustration that people have, maybe they picked up a habit of reading and they didn't really get the results they wanted and they blamed the book or they blamed the information or they blamed the author. Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. We have to ask the individuals who are not reading.
Okay, so we have a number of questions and I've kind of lost track of them. So I'm just going to call some people in some order and then I'm going to go through all of it. By the way, it doesn't have to be just a question. You can either ask a question or you can have a comment. So it's going to be Taylor and Joseph next while I set up everybody else. We've got 4 rules, folks. Number 1, raise your hand when you want to ask a question or make a comment. You can do that by typing something in the chat or typing exclamation mark or raising your hand in Zoom. There are 3 ways of doing that. Number 2, keep on topic. Today we are talking about curiosity and you know what we can learn about it. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, be courteous. Feel free to disagree with anybody on anything, but do so courteously. All right, Taylor, you're next.
I actually don't really have a comment. I was just agreeing that Shrikant's question was really great. And then I guess I think, John, your response was like spot on and really articulate. And just to add on that, yeah, I just think that kind of like reflecting on the people in my life who aren't readers and who aren't curious in that way. And really for me, it's kind of like looking at my family and kind of like the people I grew up with. I think a lot of it is like circumstantial, and like you said too, that it's hard to make that leap from like the like acquisition of knowledge to like transferring that into results. I think that was spot on.
Okay, let me add one thing. Now, our entire meetup here, which we've been running for the past 4 years, is all about knowledge. So we have a whole bunch of people who are basically committed to learning as much as they possibly can. And they found that kind of getting together on Saturdays and talking to each other about what they're learning is the best way to do that. Now, John in particular, he's in Hartford, so he travels 4 hours each way, 8 hours in order to come to the meetup. Okay, and I think I asked him, how often, how many times did you come? And he keeps track of everything. So I think it was 42 times or something like that last year. So he actually lives by, serious pursuit of knowledge. So with that, let me go ahead. So it's going to be Joseph next. Joseph, go ahead. Joe.
Hi, John. This is awesome as always. Just a quick question. Is this more about apathy? And is this story more about apathy than anything else? And which social systems promote apathy, or which ones do you feel promote apathy the most of its citizens?
So are you talking about 451?
Well, yeah, I mean, in 451 or in general too. I mean, like there's an element of apathy that is bred by, corporatism, whether it be through, our phones or whatever it may be. And there are systems that are, government run, that are solely government run, that are like China, where they're, doing a form of mind control. So what's the optimal system to prevent citizens from falling into an apathetic view on reality?
That's a very good question. Unfortunately, I don't know if I would be able to instantiate an answer. I would say sociology and cultural studies is my weakest form, my most ill-informed area of my life. And one of my chief, I guess, attributes that I try to imbue in my life is autonomy. So personally, like intrinsically, I always try to place emphasis on whatever I control, and I disregard anything going on around me. So if anybody, I don't watch news. I don't really stay informed a lot of this stuff going on. And I'm kind of always in my own world. I mean, there's obviously pros and cons to that, of course, but personally, I don't know if I could substantiate a comment. Like I said, for any societal structure, I would argue as long as the individual has access to something, access to free will and knowledge, of course, you can be externally imposed and have an external proclivity that's going to make these chances more slim that an individual does go out and seek knowledge or seek personal fulfillment or growth or anything like this. But I wouldn't be able to really comment on an exact system.
Okay, so it's going to be Stephen, and then Jeff had a comment, Moon had a comment, Faisal, Ina, and Diana. Go ahead, Stephen. Stephen, you need to unmute yourself. Stephen Golden. Nope. Okay, Jeff, you had a comment. Go ahead. Jeff? Yes,
great.
Go ahead.
Got it. So, so John, it's hard not to begin to draw parallels between the book and our age, where there seems to be such a return to the kind of camaraderie and philosophy and attitudes and actions of the time when there was the Know Nothings movement in the United States. You know, the party that sort of prided itself on just being uneducated. And you know, I always wonder what that's about a little bit. You know, does it come from kind of feelings of just having folks who maybe feel like they've been disrespected in some way, or any thoughts about that? I mean,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand the
because
question.
it's kind of at the heart of burning books. You know, it's kind of at the heart of destroying knowledge. It's at the heart of marching on the Capitol of Michigan to open up the schools in the face of Michigan being one of the highest level coronavirus outbreak states. You know, these are similar things. People who are saying, you know, you can take your knowledge and put it where the sun don't shine, and leave it to our school boards, and we'll burn the books. This is not the first time that the United States has encountered this in a critical mass of its population. And it's hard not to reflect on, okay, where does that come from? And, you know, how do we help it out in terms of creating greater progress throughout our society?
That's it. Okay. So to quickly bring up a point from the book, I believe the whole notion on why they would severely and significantly discourage the acquisition of knowledge was to make people psychologically comfortable. And this is bred of intellectual weakness, of course. And this is explained by the captain in this story to the fire chief, to the main character, where he says, someone's written a book on tobacco and cancer of the lungs. The cigarette people are weeping. Burn the book. Serenity, peace. Take your fight outside. Better yet, into the incinerator. Funerals are unhappy. Eliminate them too. So it sounds like they don't want to experience any discomfort. They want to be in a state of kind of a numb utopia. But I mean, this is, sure, it's utopia, but you are relegated to the realm of the intellectual equivalent to an animal, right? You can't acquire any knowledge. You are born, you're bred, whatever you're fed, you accept, you meekly accept, you passively accept from whoever is raising you, and then you go out through your life, you never question anything, and then you die. So I would look at this as being so pathologically soft, and I think Nietzsche would have, I think a quote from Nietzsche would fit well here, where he says the quickest way to corrupt the youth is to have them place higher esteem in those who think alike rather than those who think differently than him. So in other words, if you place higher emphasis on people that are substantiating your beliefs, that's how you become psychologically corrupt.
Next is going to be Moon had a comment. So it's going to be Moon, Faisal, and Ina next. Moon, go ahead.
Hi. I can't see my comment right now, so I'm just going to go on memory. One of my learnings in listening tonight was that the fight at one time, I'll just speak as an American here in America, but thinking about women's equality to knowledge access and the civil rights movement, again, fighting for the portion fighting for knowledge access. And it just hadn't occurred to me until listening that that was a kind of largely a developmental phase. And with the internet and some progress, not in all communities, not in all areas, but with some progress, that isn't the same fight anymore. And I just hadn't appreciated that. I mean, I felt stunned in like, wow, we've made a giant leap as a culture to move through that. And now my perception is now it's about capitalizing on knowledge, and we're back to the haves and the have-nots again, right? It's the next battle. But
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Next one up is Faisal. Faisal, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, John, for the brief on all the book. It kind of raised some question for me regarding, first the differentiation between information versus knowledge. As I feel like when we talk about information, it has some neutral connotation where information is basically available in books, but it's available everywhere, in any context. But then when we think of knowledge, I was curious about this idea of, thought, action, what motivate the seek of, the search for knowledge, and and this idea that how is that motivated, and and then also whether people have the capacity or not to digest knowledge, because really, as a human being, we're always faced with two aspects: ourselves and society. Whether the society promotes knowledge, and we live in a society that doesn't necessarily promote it, and whether the individual has that desire as well, that drive, and that leads to a lot of thinking about inner drive and the self, towards that curiosity for knowledge or not.
Okay, so are you talking about like mainly exploring the distinction between information and knowledge?
No, more. I mean that that I think is fairly clear. Like we can make that distinction, but I'm more interested in like on that drive, on that human drive towards knowledge, and that non-drive basically, because there's lots of factors that plays into that, like obviously society, and then the individual, and what motivates the individual. Like in the book, clearly the individual had an inner drive, because otherwise he wouldn't have broke that pattern of not seeking, and and then.
So I think a lot of things are bred out of necessity. I really believe that. And if you look at this is the most obvious example with Frederick Douglass. I mean, he had to, like he said, knowledge and slavery were incompatible. Like they could not exist simultaneously. So if you have one, you don't have the other. And that was a fundamental belief, fundamental part of his philosophy. And he believes that's the idea that would free him. So that was obviously born out of necessity or born out of chaos. Also, it could be born out of dissatisfaction in the sense of Guy Montag, because I think dissatisfaction is actually a worthwhile attribute, okay, a worthwhile perspective in the life. And I don't want to conflate this with being ungrateful, because we should always be grateful, of course, but I want to draw the distinction between being unsatisfied and being ungrateful. Obviously, you should be grateful. Being unsatisfied, I think there's a lot of utility in this. Well, being unsatisfied is a creative state. What I mean by this is, let's say I'm unsatisfied with any particular realm of my life, any particular aspect of my life. That means, okay, I'm unsatisfied. Therefore, let me turn to the notebook, turn to my journals and look at objectively what I am dissatisfied with. Let me look at exactly what it is. Let me pin it down. Let me try to get really specific with it. Okay, and now I can do a simple polarization exercise. Okay, I can say, okay, what is the complete opposite of this? If I describe I'm unsatisfied with my relationship, my health, my physique, whatever it is, my income, my finances, my budgeting, I can polarize it. And I can say, okay, what's the opposite of this? A successful relationship, a wealthy bank balance, whatever it happens to be, whatever you want to be satisfied with. But in short, I would say a lot of our decision-making processes, a lot of our impulses, a lot of our drives, a lot of our ambition, a lot of our motivation and inclination to act is bred out of dissatisfaction with our current state.
Yeah,
so I would say look at whatever you're dissatisfied at, and like you want to surmount that, you want to overcome that, you want to transmute that into its polarization, and that would elicit us to act.
But to me, that's one part, but that's not all the cases. I feel like there's also.
I think that's the mainly.
Yeah, I mean I guess that's what society drives us to believe or to act like, But at the same time, you can think of the way curiosity can be a matter of seeking knowledge, but without any end goal, and really on this idea of enrichment, and on this idea of, as you nurture a garden, basically, you know what I mean? It's like, as you nurture a garden, you have that surprise of what grows in the garden. That's that uncertainty of what comes out, basically. And that's how I feel like, sometimes we may want to look at that, because if we're constantly thinking of society as goal orientated, as driven of knowledge towards an end goal, it kind of deplete the human. I think it does deplete us in our thinking, rather than, and I feel like, as an artist as well, we don't have that kind of thinking. As artists, we tend to think more in terms of curiosity and what brings to the mind, basically.
Thank you, Faisal. Next one up is it's going to be Ina, Diana, then Leslie, Dave, and Kavita. Ina, go ahead.
Hi, John. Like, very interesting interpretation. Thank you. I never thought about this book as like as a quest for curiosity. I always was thinking that it's about fighting against oppression, like against living in totalitarian society and fighting for freedom, like in Russia. Like, because he wrote it, Bradbury, he wrote it in 1953. So I thought it was like about Nazi regime. I never thought it was about your own quest for like knowledge. I always thought it was like fight against oppression, like more in this venue. But but it's a very interesting. Maybe you should. I thought it was like external thing. Maybe it's internal also. But what do you think? What do you think? It's more like fight for the liberty or fight for knowledge? What do you think?
I think our subjective interpretation about objective events says more so about our psychology than it does the object being observed. So I believe my analysis of the book says more about what I value. And like I mentioned earlier, something I really place a high emphasis on is autonomy and kind of being self-guided, self-directed, self-sufficient. So I always look at things through my subjective lens, which is my conditioning, my input, my environment, everything that I look through. Can it be applied to other things? Absolutely. I mean, that's the beauty of the utility and of being ambiguous in a novel. I think that's the beauty of a work of great literature. And I think that's what makes this a classic, is that there are so many interpretations you can impose and superimpose onto this work. So, I mean, that's a good observation. I never looked at it in that way either, in your way. But I've always saw it as that, just because of that main reason I extracted that was his conversation with his wife. He says there's something in burning books. There's something in books for make someone to encourage someone to give their life for it. I need to figure out why she did that. That was the turning point in my mind. But I'm sure you could find other if you had a different, end work or framework in mind.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Next up is Diana. Diana, go ahead.
Thank you, Shrikant. John, you gave me so many wonderful things to think about. So I think I'm going to keep this unconscious incompetence idea. And what I like about this is, well, my question really is, so how do we bring these things to focus? Because I think it's very important. I agree with the statement that we are driven. I think your words were mainly by our unconscious. And so how do we begin to make the unconscious things conscious, and so we can, better?
It's a very good question. I would say there's multitudinous variables and approaches and methodologies we can use. I think first and foremost would be solitude and reflection, realizing what we are doing. And you can look at this chain of, like I was saying, information, thoughts, beliefs, paradigms, self-image, actions, habits, results. You can kind of go backwards. You can flip it. You can say results. Okay, I'm acting on my beliefs. Okay, let me take a look at all the results of my life. And this requires, firstly, self-awareness. Secondly, humility. You have to be honest with yourself. If you don't like your results, you have to actually confront them, because awareness is the first step to taking action and taking change or making change. So I think that's one way to do to go about it. Sit in solitude and look at the results in your life and write them out on paper as clear and concise as you possibly can, and then design your the polarization exercise I was talking about earlier. If you're unsatisfied with a particular area or particular result, you can polarize it and look at the opposite, and then get as proportionately clear as you did with your current results. And then the clearer you get, the more commensurate your action steps are going to become. So if you have a clear image here, a clear image here, you could definitively define the difference between them. If you have a vague image here, a vague image here, it's not really going to work that well, or your actions are going to be vague, or your plan's going to be vague. So I think clarity is really the of supreme importance here, and clarity would come from reflection. I think reflection is most conducive and efficaciously performed in solitude.
Excellent. The next question is from Leslie's iPad 2.
Hi, I had two comments about things that have been said, and you can respond to whatever you'd like. I was thinking about in 451 how eliminating knowledge was to serve the purpose of creating a sense of peace. But I think in the modern world, eliminating knowledge and curiosity and rational thought is just a tool to make people easily inflamed and manipulated by demagogues. So our modern experience about why people would try to limit knowledge is different from achieving peace. It's for, I think, ultimately creating chaos. And then my second observation was with the story about the woman in the burning house. And it reminded me of this principle in writing screenplays and writing songs. It's show me, don't tell me. Don't tell me how to feel. Show me something that helps me feel. And so the woman in the burning house didn't tell the firefighter all the reasons why books were important to her. She simply showed by the fact that she was willing to give her life. And it reminds me of the Tibetan monks who would immolate themselves, that because I always wondered why. Were they doing it to galvanize people who already supported them? But I think this Fahrenheit 451 suggests that those monks were trying to make a statement that this matters so much to me, I will die for it. Maybe it's worth your consideration also.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Excellent. Next question or comment is, we have got now Dave, Kavita, George, and Jenny. And then we'll go to the breakout rooms. Dave, go ahead.
Shrikant and John, thank you very much. It occurred to me the issue is brainwashing, the authoritarian figure subjugating the masses. And it's interesting about this book, and I'll be honest, I haven't read the book, but I saw the movie a long time ago, is that you don't see the brainwashing figure, but it's obviously that it's happened. And it reminds me of other similar stories about society, the most famous 1984, where you see the fearless leader, but other ones, movies I love were Blade Runner and Logan's Run about society. And what strikes me is that they were all very futuristic. And this, although it's, I remember about the architecture being different, things like that, but it didn't seem to be futuristic. And to me, it makes a point they can happen now. Mm-hmm. And when we have a leader in the middle of an epidemic that tells people to go around disobeying the rules, no face coverings, stay close together, and to hate the elites. And I would admit, I think most of us have books. I'm not in front of my bookcase, but I think most of us are educated. We love books, but there's a lot of people out there that hate the elites, and I doubt very few of them have books.
I agree. Yeah, that's a good insight. Thank you.
Next one up is Kavita. Kavita, go ahead. Kavita, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, next one up is George. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, Shrinkat, thank you. John, great job, man.
Thank you.
I haven't read the book since I was a teenager. But from what I recall, the book is a powerful image. So I was wondering, I guess it's two parts. If it is an image, in your mind, what does the book symbolize? And I guess associated with that is who are the firemen today?
That's a very good question. I think for me to give a good answer, I think I would have to know more about like culture and society. But I think an interpretation of that can be, I mean, any individual, it could be ourselves, any individual who is going to deprive oneself of the necessary steps that will get them the circumstances that they want. Okay, so if you are turning a blind eye to something, if you are neglecting your voice of conscience, which is actually another discussion we're going to have in the future, if you're not listening to your conscience, if you are, again, depriving yourself of this, any part of this chain from information to paradigm to actions to results, if you're depriving yourself of any iota in that variable, in that equation, I think that would be the equivalent of a fireman, for you're depriving yourself access to, I mean, obviously what the firemen were literally doing, depriving access to information, depriving access to adventure or to change or to any circumstances that were different from what they had. And I mean, obviously in the story, it was externally imposed on them from a tyrannical society and a dystopian sense of paradigm throughout the collective unconscious. But I would say it could also be relegated to the level of the individual. Anybody who deprives themselves any contingent step in this journey from information to results. That's what I would say.
Okay, I think this is a good time to kind of break up into breakout rooms. What we are trying to do is we are trying to do something, John and I, we're trying to do something far more systematic this time. John has come up with 3 questions. So we are going to, John is going to lead one of the rooms. I'm going to lead the other room. And we're going to go through 3 questions. First question, and everybody will get to answer the question. First question is, when was the moment in your life when you realized the importance of learning and acquiring knowledge? That's first question. Second question is, what are some of the ways you would acquire and maintain the habit and the love of learning? And number 3, what in your opinion is the best way to learn? Observation, teaching, discussing, study, implementing, reflecting, etc. So that's what we're going to do. So again, John, thank you very much for a fantastic presentation. See you guys in the breakout rooms.